The footage provided for this video is from ALandWhale, as I can't be bothered to log in and play the game in its current state. Thanks to him for providing it with relatively short notice. I'll post his socials in the description below. For the last 3 years, the entire point of my work on this subject was the complete and utter removal of the 20% reduction to small arms from the game. In my time examining the problems with it, I settled on 3 key areas of gameplay that are negatively affected by its very existence. After my initial video on the topic, I took a few years to think about it and went on to publish what I thought was a very concise 10 minutes or so video on where my thinking had taken me on the subject. Obviously, thinking on a subject over an extended period of time will lead to revisions, changes in philosophy, and new ideas. My original video was primarily focused on Nanoweave, from a little bit of a different perspective from where I am now. When I initially approached the topic, it didn't really take all that much effort to identify the albatross that it was, and remains to be, in relation to its other options. I find that its usefulness sticks out even to the most casual players. Most people can get at least this far, it seems to me, in beginning to understand that there might be a problem. Unfortunately, this seems to be as far as most people get when thinking about or discussing the topic. They kinda get that there might be a little bit of an issue when it comes to loadout variety, when you're presented with a very powerful choice over a bunch of others that maybe don't stack up quite as nicely. They can get that far, but that's generally where all critical thinking ends. Their solution, often enough in these cases, is to just deal with this problem by making it a passive, so you can just use whatever you like. And I agree. That would be a totally viable solution if your only concern was suit slot viability. Unfortunately, suit slot viability is probably one of the most insignificant facets of the problem when compared relatively. So I get why this solution works for a lot of people. The only problem with this solution is that it misses the rest of the problems completely in an effort to address a very niche part of the overall situation. I find that this suggestion gets parroted ad nauseum, so that by the time a casual player, who hasn't obviously devoted any level of critical thinking to the subject, sees his 10th Nanoweave discussion post on Reddit, he's ready to join everybody else and contribute to the conversation. This is probably the most frustrating part of the entire conversation for me. For someone that has spent literal years trying to better understand and look into a gameplay balance issue and think critically about it, watching swaths of players settle almost immediately on the most basic bitch, zero effort needed copy-paste response is rather disappointing, to say the least. Now for you, the make it passive guy. I've already addressed your idea here as a viable solution in dealing with the most basic level of the problem, the suit slot inventory disparity. Unfortunately, you have all of your work left ahead of you. Please feel free now to identify how exactly your solution addresses the rest of the problems that have been identified. Now, for clarity, you need to sort out how making it passive solves the following: overcomplexity in health values, feeling of weapon ineffectiveness at range, and unnecessary skill gap bloat. Since I know that you won't do this yourself, I'll take the liberty to break down your solution and how it applies to all 3 areas. As for overcomplexity and health values, this one is probably as close as you're going to get to having an acceptable answer. I cannot refute that making Nanoweave passive for everyone would, in fact, limit overcomplexity in health values. It's actually true. However, we're once again at a point where, although I do identify this as a problem, I think it's probably not as bad or severe as the other problems brought up. In that sense, if I were to rank the severity of each individual problem presented by the suit slot, I would rate suit slot diversity as 4th, this one here as 3rd, perceived weapon ineffectiveness as 2nd, and skill gap bloat as number 1. Again, I'm not saying that making it passive doesn't solve any of these problems identified. I just find that, as a standalone solution, it doesn't go far enough to address any of the more important issues presented here. There. I've had my turn at being intellectually honest when it comes to the offered solution. I hope you will be as charitable from here on out. How does making Nanoweave passive address the perceived weapon ineffectiveness in ranged combat? Well, quite frankly, it doesn't. In fact, it makes the problem worse. At least in a time where Nanoweave is still optional, and not the baseline, Sometimes now, you're still able to shoot at people with automatic weapons at range without the obnoxious bullet-to-kill bloat. I think it's worth mentioning that when we get into bullet-to-kill talk and time-to-kill, we have to realize that these values are derived from what the situation would look like with absolutely perfect accuracy. Something that even the best players in the game never achieve in most cases. Speaking on ranged combat in the game, we're talking about an entirely different animal. Most players in this game struggle to understand and control weapon spread and recoil characteristics mightily. I've spoken at length before on this subject, so I'm not going to rehash the entire thing here, but the entire game seems to me a very poor matchup of not very good FPS players, if they are FPS players at all, saddled with rather punishing odds and ends all scattered throughout the gameplay. Most of these players struggle even in a weapon's maximum damage range, let alone when you introduce any kind of significant distances. Let's use an example of a 143 damage weapon without soft point ammunition. In its maximum damage range of 10 meters and in, it will take 7 shots to kill a normal target and 9 shots to kill a Nanoweave target. After 1 tier of drop, this turns into an 8-shot kill on a normal target and 10 shots to kill on a Nanoweave target. After 2 tiers of drop, this turns into a 9-shot kill on a normal target and a 12-shot kill on a Nanoweave target. I find it interesting that in max damage range and 1 tier of drop, there is a consistency of a 2 bullet to kill increase in going from a non-Nanoweave target to a Nanoweave target. But upon the 2nd tier of drop for the 143 damage weapon, you experience a 3 bullet difference. As a comparison, the 167 damage weapon that falls off 2 tiers of damage does not experience this 3 bullet difference at 2 tiers of drop, and this seems to only occur when your damage reaches the 112 damage tier against Nanoweave targets. Now, keep in mind that these numbers I'm rattling off are strictly body shots on non-heavy assault targets. Did you guys forget that there are limb multipliers as well? Combine this with the fact that your automatic weapons with higher damage values intended for range all universally come with worse bloom and recoil characteristics, and you've got quite the recipe for frustrating ranged combat. I haven't even mentioned the part where if anyone even remotely competent is using a brainless bolt action or a battle rifle against you in these situations, you might as well not even bother. Do you really wonder why players get frustrated with automatic weapons at range in this game? Is it that hard to understand that putting your average PlanetSide 2 player in a situation where he has to land 12, 13, 14, or 15 shots to put someone down leads him to a feeling of weapon ineffectiveness with assault rifles, light machine guns, and carbines, nominally the majority of weapons in the game? Do you not see the laughably stupid bloat to these values that a 20% reduction to small arms damage inflicts? Is there even a question why these players almost universally turn to the ease of use of other weapons? Of course not. I already know you haven't considered any of this because Make It a Passive was your best offering, and that's embarrassing. How does making Nanoweave passive address the skill gap bloat introduced by the suit slot? Well, you guessed it. It does nothing here. I've spent over half a decade of going to war with people on Reddit, the forums, in-game, on YouTube, and Twitch preaching self-improvement as the primary way to deal with whatever problems they were having in-game. I've also spent the better part of a decade farming the absolute shit out of these same players. I can log onto the game today, right now, and be at the top of the physio activity leaderboard with ease, as has been the case for the last couple years. Now, don't misunderstand me, this isn't me bragging by any means. I'm in the twilight of my playing time now, with nothing really left to do that I haven't already done. One thing I've learned along the way, playing this way and championing for self-improvement for as many years as I have, is that regrettably the average PlanetSide 2 player doesn't care about these things. The average PlanetSide 2 player doesn't care about min-max bursting patterns, or analyzing what gunfights he should take and which ones he shouldn't. He doesn't care about killing the most people in the fastest time possible. He doesn't care about anything that I care about. While this is ultimately rather frustrating to me, as a player, when I finally took the opportunity to step away from the game in the first significant way I've been able to, I began to empathize more with this player. I suppose it was an underlying feeling I had the entire time I was actively playing the game, but it was very hard for me to get off the just aim better meme wagon. And while it's still absolutely true to this day that the absolute best way to improve absolutely is to aim better and headshot every bullet, this isn't realistic for the vast majority of the population. I don't think it has anything to do with mechanical ability. I think it has a whole lot more to do with mindsets and dedication to doing something. Everyone can improve. Most people don't care to. With that said, we have to talk about opportunity costs and reward. For me, personally, once I figured out how spread works in this game and could leverage that into practical shooting application, it never made any sense to spray the body any longer. Depending on the weapon, I knew that I would have around 4 to 6 shots where spread wouldn't outright deter me from starting on a player's head. You know, on a related note, I've always laughed at people who advise players in this game to start with body shots and let the recoil kick up to the head to finish the kill. This would be totally applicable for a game that has no spread mechanics, but doing it in this game is probably the dumbest way to shoot, and openly telling others to do it as well makes you all look dumb. Your most accurate shots are always going to be your first 4 to 6. When you finally get around to understanding how the weapon mechanics work, it should strike you as rather dumb and lazy to be using the most accurate set of bullets you're going to get on the largest hitbox available. How many gunfights do you lose shooting this way when you're expecting recoil to let you finish with a headshot, and neglecting the fact that you're relying on your weapon to hit the smallest part of the hitbox at your weapon's most inaccurate point? You're literally shooting the weapons completely the opposite way they should be shot. Anyway, back to the point. The reason for having an increased multiplier in shooter games for the head is to reward the skill-based ability to leverage a weapon's innate inaccuracy or accuracy to hit a smaller target. The reward for this demonstration of ability, in PlanetSide 2's case, is the 2x headshot multiplier. I feel as though this is perfectly acceptable for the speed of the game and the gunplay mechanics associated with it. If you're interested in further discussion on the headshot multiplier, there is some other content on this channel that deals with it in its theoretical reduction. What I have an issue with is the bloat that comes into play when a 20% reduction to body damage is thrown into the equation. With the inclusion of a 20% reduction in damage from small arms to any area of the body that is not the head, you artificially increase the value of the headshot to 2.5 times. For maximum transparency, let's again take the 143 damage weapon as the example. This weapon, with a 2x headshot multiplier, deals 286 damage per headshot and 143 to the body without Nanoweave. The math here to determine the percent value of the bonus is 286 divided by 143 times 100, in this case 200, or 200%, which is what the 2x multiplier is. Now, a Nanoweave environment calculation. The 143 damage weapon still does 286 damage per headshot, but the body damage that the weapon does changes from 143 to 114.4. The same math that we've done before, 286 divided by 114.4 times 100, gives us a 250% value for a headshot over a body shot. You know, when Nanoweave was last changed because some sniper players were whining about not being able to get one-shot headshot kills at specific ranges, I don't really think anyone thought the whole Nanoweave ignores headshot damage thing through very well. I'm not really sure the original change was even justified to solve the original problem, but I'm fairly confident that the second and third order effects of that change were barely brought up, if at all. The game is fine with a 2x headshot multiplier. Having something in the game that gives regular weapons a 2.5 times multiplier is, by definition, excessive. Now, what exactly is the definition of excessive? Excessive. More than is necessary, normal, or desirable, immoderate. I honestly have a hard time finding a better word to fit this exact scenario. Is a 2.5 times multiplier more than is necessary? Absolutely. More than is normal? In this case, with normal being a 2x multiplier, yep. Is a 2.5 times multiplier as it relates to this game and its weapons desirable? Absolutely not. Immoderate? Not sensible or restrained? Of course not. Headshots, with the inclusion of a 20% reduction to small arms as a mechanic, are excessively over-rewarded in the game's design, whether you like it or not. Blindly fighting to keep this bloat in the game because of self-interest, I find, is one of the worst aspects of this discussion. What I want to challenge here is the notion that if headshots are not over-rewarded as they currently are in the game, that this would somehow drastically lower the skill gap of the gunplay. This is plainly not the case. The players that farm you now, that chain headshot, will still chain headshot and kill you. The bad player in this case still always loses against the better aimer because he is unable to leverage the headshot multiplier as well as the good player. Nothing is changed here. If it were the case that a less skilled player would all of a sudden be lighting the world on fire with body shots comparatively to headshots, then you'd have something to talk about. But alas, this is not the case, and not even close to being a reality. Making Nanoweave a passive does nothing to address this over-rewarding of headshots. Period. In conclusion, I've gone out of my way to try and demonstrate why making Nanoweave a passive is not a viable solution to fixing the problems that it introduces into the game. I've made concessions when and where I can, most notably in the context of health complexity, but when your suggestion only mildly addresses some lower impact problems, but completely fails at addressing the more critical ones, I will reject it outright. So, for you, Mr. Make Nanoweave Passive, please try and think more critically about the suggestions you make for the game when it comes to deep-seated gameplay balance issues. Stop just going with the crowd and parroting the individuals that haven't thought about the problem at all. As for the developers, please continue taking player feedback, but for the love of God, don't listen to their solutions, unless you're wholly interested in keeping the game in exactly the failed state that it's existed in for years. Thank you.